Hey, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Critical Data Storytelling for Libraries, which is this month's Edi and Neal's book club event produced by ALA Editions. For this event, we ask that you submit questions throughout the presentation for our author presenter, who is Kate McDowell, to answer following her presentation, which should last about 45 minutes. Please use the Q&A function in your Zoom interface to submit questions, as that is a lot easier for us to chat than using the chat is. Kate's book, which is the third title in our Critical Cultural Information Studies series, is entitled Critical Data Storytelling for Libraries, Crafting Ethical Narratives for Advocacy and Impact, and it is now shipping. You can purchase it at alastore.ala.org or via your preferred vendor. Bulk sale discount and textbook desktop queries regarding the book are welcomed at editionsmarketing@ala.org. Again, that email address is editionsmarketing@ala.org. However, to guarantee the best discount offers, be sure to join the ALA or to renew your membership. Visit ala.org/membership to explore more of ALA's membership benefits. All right. I want to go ahead and very shortly welcome Kate McDowell from the U of I, our state university. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here. And so let me just start with some sharing. And wouldn't you know it, that construction noise that's been quiet all day has just begun. Just our luck. Hopefully everybody can see things. I can see your chat as you go. It's really a joy to be here to talk with you about this book that's been a long time in the making. And I want to start with a story because storytelling is at the heart of what we're doing here. I want to tell you about a time many years ago when I was part of a library renovation project. I was a children's librarian in the late 1990s and early aughts, and I was sitting at a table with a lot of my colleagues with the blueprints for a proposed renovation. We had all the data, everything had been measured, we could see the pictures, but we didn't know what to do because to renovate this children's department, we were probably going to need to cover over this 1970s concrete waffle ceiling. I don't know if anybody remembers 1970s concrete waffle ceilings, but they're like squares above your head with like a space for a can light in the middle. And if you just hold the book exactly right, you might be able to get your light under the book. It was a miserable kind of ceiling space. Admin didn't know what to do, but they trusted staff with this thorny problem that they couldn't solve. And one of my colleagues spoke up and she said, "Hey, why don't we dig the floor down deeper?" And that changed that library. To this day, the Urbana Free Library has a children's department that's light and bright and airy because the floor was dug down deeper. There's stairs or a ramp or a special children's cubbyhole entrance to get into that space. And it really is a metaphor for what I think this book is trying to help us as a field do. We have opportunities to dig down deeper into the data that we've been collecting all along in order to do this work of critical data storytelling. So critical data storytelling, here's the book, here are the chapters. I'm not going to go through every chapter for you, but you can get a sense of the kinds of topics here that are in the book. It is the third book in the Critical Cultural Information Studies series by Dr. Nicole Cook, and I'm very delighted to be working with the absolutely brilliant Dr. Nicole Cook, who is Augusta Baker Chair at the University of South Carolina in the production of this book. So it combines, the book encourages people to combine data as evidence with narrative strategies in critical ways so that we can advocate for the best possible information services for libraries and communities. Critical insights include that the focus has to be on ethical data for library advocacy. We as a field have to avoid some really common pitfalls of overgeneralizing about people, even stereotyping, because those things will alienate audiences, especially when we're representing social data back to the people that are supposed to be represented by it. So I wanted to write this guide for library staff and other information professionals to navigate the practical possibilities of library advocacy with data storytelling. And it's based on a couple of different things. A recent IMLS project I'll talk about briefly, and also some of my own experiences as a storyteller, consultant, and professor. So our agenda for today looks a little something like this. We're going to start with history because it's a good time to start with history. Then we'll talk about data. audiences. And in the book chapters, you'll find the last chapters about misinformation. But here today, we're really going to talk about resilience. What does it mean to be resilient in these times? So to start with history, I am so fortunate to be part of this library tradition of storytelling. Dr. Betsy Hearn in the bottom right was my own mentor at the Center for Children's Books. I also took storytelling with Dr. Janice Del Negro at Dominican. In the top right, you'll see Augusta Baker. This is the hero after whom the named chair at University of South Carolina is named. Augusta Baker was created massive momentum in representing real children in library collections in all of their great diversity. And even earlier, there came Carolyn Hewins in that fabulous hat. We'll come back to her later. I've done a lot of talks and consulting in the last decade or so, and you can see national, state level, and international organizations. This includes work with PAHO, which is the Pan American Health Organization, part of the World Health Organization, in 2021, where some of my colleagues were detecting viral misinformation in real time, and I was on the communications team to try to find story-derived ways to combat misinformation that would really stick. I've been teaching both storytelling, as you can see here, since 2003, and data storytelling since 2017 as courses in ethical and engaging information communication. We have always been living in this world of burgeoning data and new storytelling challenges my entire career. I've co-taught with this wonderful team of people that you can see below. And finally, I mentioned there was an IMLS project. We are in a little bit of it's a hard mode to be in, having had the funding stopped and then restarted, but without good ways to fund students for a whole semester right now, and without good ways to fund some of the subcontractors that we had. So this is with the Public Library Association, with my co-PIs, Matt and Jill. We are intending still to find a way to create pathways for common data storytelling needs in libraries. And there is a live demo that you can see now. Some of you are multitaskers, and I relate. I do that too. That's why I send links as I go. We've had over 1,200 users so far from 50 countries. And we used a series of research methods that I will not be going into today, but the summary of this is we designed this with librarians for librarians. And when I say librarians, I really mean everybody who works in library spaces trying to communicate data stories ethically. We had over 100 direct contributors from library workers to the refinement of this toolkit. So I need to pause and do one definition, which is my definition of storytelling. And it's not mine alone. It really comes from this tradition. It's not simply a delivery of story from teller to audience. You can see the teller here with the metaphorical mouth, could be writing, could be video. You can see the audience here with metaphorical ear, any kind of reception. And just notice that the ingredients here are more than just delivering this story. The story emerges as a result of the dynamic interaction between the teller, the audience, the way that the audience interprets the story. This is what makes story special as an information form. I can send you my JSIST article if you'd like to know the information theory behind story as a fundamental information form, published in 2021. But the ingredients here, I want you to notice, are more human than non-human. This means that data, and by which I mean blueprints, numbers, statistics, charts, graphs, visuals, interactive dashboards, they can't tell the story alone. Data really doesn't tell stories or drive or decide anything. Even AI built on large data can only provide the results of calculations that are derived from that data. We are the ones that tell stories. We drive and we decide. No AI model in the world would have come up with digging the floor deeper, is my current contention. And tell me if I'm wrong. I'd love to learn more. But that was a really creative solution that required humans to dig in deeper to their understanding of physical space. So we tell stories, we drive, and we decide. And now is my time. I want to pause and ask to learn a little bit more about you. So it says show of hands, but really it's just type in the chat, however is comfortable for you. And type as fast as you want. I've been teaching online since 1998. I'm really comfortable with this. I'd love to know, what's your current comfort level? How do you make sense of information? Which do you rely on more? And your answers could involve at least one of these words, but you could also write your own phrase. Data, is it data that you rely on most? Story, is it both? Is it neither? Yeah, I like these. Both story, but getting better, depends on the circumstances. It's a tool, right, exactly. Data can be good too. So one of the beautiful things that I see immediately when I ask these questions is that I notice that data first or story first is something that has been a divide in our field. It's becoming less of a divide in our field, and that is good news for us because we need to unsilo ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Data storytelling, broadly defined, really does involve ethical commitments to both data and story. And so making sure that both have been refined, made meaning from, practiced is extremely important. I'll show you a few of the struggles that I have found in my research beyond the book that the field faces, but it'll help set the tone too. So there's this definition of data storytelling that our teams have used that is deliberately very broad. It means any presentation of data using narrative strategies in story form. And this is important because it's not always easy to translate data into story. It's also important because a lot of our library stories are really ephemeral. They get passed around inside the organization informally, and we don't capture them for outside audiences, even though outside audiences might really be able to make meaning from some of the things that we're doing. I'll give a few examples. Library data needs story before storage. This beautiful sealed jar is a metaphor for what strong collectors we are. We tend to collect things and store them and keep them. Great power in that. However, library data needs to be told. It needs to be storied. It needs to be shared. I'll tell you a story about discovering some of these silos in my own work. In spring 2023, I had a librarian describe difficulty in one of my workshops getting data from the expert who was collecting and analyzing it, but just wasn't sharing it, was sealing it. And this was, she was concerned about this person. She wanted to know how to persuade the colleague to share data. And immediately another hand in the room shot up. And that was the data person, the data expert from another library. And their frustration was that nobody ever asked for the data. They just wanted one number. They imagined they could answer all their questions with one number. So there is a lot of importance in acknowledging the depth of work behind making meaning from data. And in this conversation, there were several really important, insights that emerged. First, a lot of people imagine that a single specific data point is going to be a decisive factor, so they request very specific data without even asking about the context in which that data was collected or how it could be accurately interpreted. So we've got to respect our data folks, right? It's really important. Second, folks who maybe are like me, kind of creative and imaginative, might approach reports based on data as the launching point for a discussion about what else could we know? What else could we find out? But if you've spent years, really curating an excellent data set, those what else can we know questions are going to be frustrating to data experts. And for story experts, they aren't actually going to get you where you think where you really need to go. You need to pause and talk with those data experts who've stewarded the data because they have knowledge. And so the frustration for data experts looks something like this. Colleagues who are intimidated by data try to steer the conversation to something more familiar or speculate about what else could be gathered. And a data expert gets frustrated, becomes reluctant to share data, and we start having these sealed jars, these communication disconnects, and they become structural problems for a library. What I will say is in the workshop, with that compassionate framing for one another, compassionate framing for both creativity and for the facts, the conversation really took off and everybody started thinking about how we can engage with each other's work. So I want to bring us to critical, because critical storytelling is about power, and it comes from the European tradition of the Frankfurt School philosophers, from the American tradition of critical race theory, first authored by Kimberly Crenshaw, and from Data Feminism by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein. So critical really means to think about power. It means to think with healthy skepticism about what is, what might be, and what should be. So I want to tell a story that I know at least one person here knows very well. There was an elected leader who advocates for unhoused people who shared a story with me privately about requesting that a water fountain be installed in a downtown plaza after a recent increase in incidents of homelessness. Publicly, the way they told this story was to ask for the change so that dogs and babies and nursing mothers could easily access water. But in a private aside, the person shared that unhoused people would also benefit. But they told me the city officials won't do it for homeless people. Everybody wants dogs and babies to have water, but not the homeless. I want you to notice that multiple versions of this story are true. Dogs, babies, people would all benefit from a new water fountain, right? This is actually a social good in a broad way. However, which version of the story is told depends on the audience. It is always desirable to be able to change hearts and minds. That's the long-term win. But it might be that the short-term win is getting the water fountain installed. And some of our wins have to come in that with a higher urgency. Our audiences don't always embrace the same ideals as our profession. So if a subset of a true story achieves the desired result and aligns with library values, then choose a true story that resonates most with the audience. That's a way of thinking about storytelling as a dynamic, critical process of thinking about power and what's going to work in this situation. Putting it all together, critical data storytelling means seeing power, knowing that people are impacted by the social conditions of their lives in ways that determine whether or not they have the power to change them. And I want to share one of our most classic documents here, remembering that early versions of this document were drafted in the 1930s in the United States. The Library Bill of Rights. Now, this is not a legal Bill of Rights. It is an exercise in critical thinking about what it means to be a free person in a free society. And I do believe we should be reclaiming words like free, left, right, and center, especially when it comes to librarianship's professional ideals of intellectual freedom. I want to give one other brief example of developing the ability to tell a truthful, well-evidenced story in different ways. So let's imagine an effective advocacy story about increasing funding for library renovations that benefit people with physical mobility issues. Let's imagine you could present that, and it might be good to get used to presenting things in multiple ways, as a one-paragraph budget request with exactly the necessary funding numbers. Very cut and dried. It could be a presentation that provides demographic data about people with physical disabilities. And don't forget that most older adults at some point run into physical mobility challenges that are inside that service district of the library. It could also include a visual map of the physical paths that a person using a walker, wheelchair, or cane, or needing door opening assistance might have to take to enter or exit the library, either to use the library or to get to a particular program. Those can be different paths depending on the buildings, right? You could also tell the story of a person. This could be a real person if you know someone who's giving their enthusiastic consent to have their name used. Or you can completely anonymize this with a hypothetical person, but it should be based on real, plausible data, whose life is changed or would be changed when a library renovation replaces old, crowded, narrow shelves with spacious aisles so that people can actually get in there. You could also provide a map of current state and after renovation differences that would show the increased augmented routes by which a person with physical mobility limitations could access every book in the building, for example, and maybe all the resources. And this is just another kind of example. So here's a quick quote from the book as a moment of reflection. And one thing I did is I put some reflection moments into this talk, partly so I could have a quick drink of my tea and partly so you could think with me. I really do believe that the task of any culturally competent librarian is not only to see power, but also to reorder things so that systems improve. That is really important to think about. So let's move on a little bit to talking about data. And one thing we're going to do for sure is focus on how to build stories. I can't give you the whole book in a 45-minute webinar, but I can give you some real tastes of what it is that that we need to do in order to be. And I'm looking at, there's a comment that got a lot of comments back from the wonderful Danielle Chenoweth. I think that the things I'm talking about changing things in relation to seeing power are based in fundamental humanization, and that's based in library ethics. And that's not the only ethics it's based in, of course, but certainly for this field, that's a fundamental thing. So when we look at data, we are thinking about how we're collecting it ethically, how we're making sure people's identities are exactly as anonymized or shared as they wish. I won't be sharing any student examples in this because they're not in the book, but when I share student examples, what I do is I make sure that I know exactly what kind of credit my students want. Do they want to be anonymous? Do they want to be named by name and perhaps workplace, because it might help them in the world if I talk about their good work? So it's thinking about the ethics of when and what context around data to share is already a really important problem. But let's imagine that you've actually been gathering data for a while. This is not a new data program for you. This is a new story building program for you. I'm going to imagine that you have lots of reporting that you have to do. Somebody in your library is gathering various kinds of statistics, evidence, and reporting it up to state levels, sometimes federal levels. We're going to have those federal data sources that keep going through all of this. But let's imagine you need to build a data after you need to build a story after you've collected all this data, and you've got lots of data stored. Most libraries have lots of data stored. As before, we are storage experts. We are almost too strong at storage. So we came up with a set of strategies through the course of building the toolkit. Initially, the goal was to try to build just example stories for people. But then we started thinking about, that's like the story of the water fountain or the story of a library renovation. We started thinking about what are the real goals that people have and what are the motivations for the message that they're trying to get across. So what we came up with was a matrix. And so it starts with these 4 goals on the left and 3 motivations on the right. So the goals might be to understand what people really need, to serve the real needs, real there, because these should be to some degree based on data about our communities, build on strengths, or address deficits. Um, on the other side, you've got motivations for message. Those include sharing achievements, benchmarking, or justifying investments. We put these together, and this is actually in the toolkit that you can see as in the motivations and goals matrix section. You can go through and choose and get ultimately there are 12 different cases here, 3 times 4. And you can see 4 real examples for every case. So I encourage you to look at the toolkit as well. But in the book, this appears in this form, so that you can begin to see how the matrix works, right? Now, we have 45 minutes, and I'm not going to walk you through all of these things. It wouldn't even necessarily benefit you because your needs are different from someone else's needs. And it's important that we know that this is these patterns, these goals don't dictate the data. Goals help us to figure out which data helps us indicate which goals are possible and relevant. So we've distilled this wisdom from library research. And the patterns in stories that have really worked well for people are captured here. So using this, you can craft the foundational logic of a data story. This is the folklore of our public institution justification, and justifying public institutions has always been the task of those who steward them. Perhaps that task has taken on broader resonance and some deeper meaning lately. The other reason to focus on these motivations and goals, aside from their history and use value, is just that stories can't do everything all at once. one story will solve one problem at a time. So it is important to think about what are your specific goals for this story. One story will not cover every goal that is here. And what are your specific motivations? Maybe you could get two in there. Maybe you could benchmark and then justify higher expenditures in a particular area, but you probably won't be able to get all three of those motivations into any one story. So that should be something of a relief. We can tell one story at a time and really make a difference. We can also look at one kind of data at a time. I'm actually going to walk us through three examples of kinds of data. If you're not aware of, I encourage you to become aware of the kinds of things that national and state level agencies collect, as well as regional consortia, which actually probably should be down with the regional group. But regional organizations are extremely important for library data storytelling because too often we are only looking at the things on the next slide, which are the internal data. So for example, we know what our budgets are. We have community engagement and outreach. There are foundations raising money. There's a physical plant of some kind. There's use of library services that we can measure in different ways. So the goal here is to make sure that all of these activities are connected to the real people in these communities. And to get to that, you might well need things like, I'll go back to the previous slide for a second, school district data. You might really need to know who is being served by the school district. To what extent does the school district is it contiguous with, is it the same as the library district? Are they different? Those create different challenges for students in schools for a public library. For an academic library, you might need to know transit systems. Let's imagine a community college library for just a moment, which is in some cases more like the funding and power structure of a public library. They have to be funded by local people who consent to paying taxes. There's a local governing board, much like a public library. So a community college library, how and whether those transit systems are in place will be the basis of powerful stories that you can tell about what gaps there might be, or even what achievements that your city or town has made. So it's thinking through data sources in terms of how they relate to the data that we have, because certainly program attendance, circulation use, card holders, all of the actual use of library services will vary depending on whether or not transit makes it possible to get to and stay at the library for periods of time, public or academic. Okay, so let me show you two examples of two of these. Let's just dig into one. We're going to dig into two examples for each of two particular parts in the matrix. So let's talk about addressing deficits and benchmarking. Let's imagine you're pretty sure you're behind on something. Your goal is to see what these numbers mean in relation to other libraries. And you're going to now benchmark. You're going to compare with outside standards or trends and keep up with the larger library community. That word benchmark is useful all by itself. I'll also mention there is a tool that both the Public Library Association and the Association of College and Research Libraries have, depending on your type of library, that you can access and see some basic data about your library without a subscription. There's even more powerful tools, especially data visualization, in there with a subscription. So let's think about addressing deficits and benchmarking. Two examples. Here's a project that benchmarked to address deficits across Illinois with a combination of academic and public library consortia looking at digital equity, broadband for libraries. So trying to solve the problem of the 1.5 million residents without access to internet or computer equipment in their households. So that's an example of a project that you could tell a tremendous story about. I've heard some great stories about this project. Another example that's worth thinking about as well is, so similar topic would be benchmarking to address deficits. Let's think about the 2022 Urban Library Trauma Study, which if you haven't seen it already, I would encourage you to read. Some of the problems and dynamics described here are not only in urban settings, but they have been researched in urban settings in order to create safer workplaces, and focusing on, again, paying attention to power. Who are the workers that these problems most impact with trauma-informed strategic planning? So both of those are examples of the kinds of stories you might build by benchmarking to address deficits. In this case, a deficit being a harmful experience in the workplace or many harmful experiences. Okay, let's use the matrix one more time. This will be this is my second walkthrough. Motivations, we're going to use justification. Fantastic. I know, Leah. Go, Leah. I've been sharing your work left, right, and center. So motivations of justification and serving real needs. Let's imagine it's hard to measure how thirsty people are, right? For water fountains, it's difficult. But let's think about what could this look like? So one thing this does look like is that the services that academic libraries provide do increase student success. The research on this is sound. It is well documented that students who use the library achieve higher levels of academic success. So now this is a justification to keep doing that service and to make sure as best we can that the cuts are minimal and restoration is as full as it can be when we're talking about what happens in academic libraries. So another justification to serve real needs is the unfortunate fact that, and this is Keith Lance Curry. I'm so sorry to Keith Lance Curry if you're here. I'm forgetting the order of your hyphenated last name. Fewer school librarians in schools that need them the most is a reality. It's even more of a reality now. And these are some of the things that would be justification for revisiting what the schools are doing in terms of funding or not funding librarians. I would say there's a real opportunity to lobby charter schools in this regard. Keith Curry Lance, thank you, Ramon. You are awesome. All of this is to say, to sum up the data section and get to audiences, that we need a data life cycle. This is straight from the book that involves not just numbers 1, collection, and 4, storage, but we need systematic support to reuse and to create meaning. Number 2, analysis, visualization, real deep story crafting that involves needs that we know are important to our communities. We need to do number 3 too. This is really almost a matter of making our data our own. I've talked with libraries who got great new data viz packages, and they were stymied as to what stories to tell because the data viz didn't really guide them into what was important. Again, that's our work. We have to do that work. So we need to make that data our own and create it and communicate it strategically as part of having a full life cycle for the data that we connect with. Another reflection moment for you at just beyond our halfway point. How can you extend the life of your data with storytelling? I'm going to move on to audiences. Audiences are important. You should know them. How should you know them? Well, there's even more to this triangle than I said. In fact, you'll find things in the book in chapters 1, 3, and 4 about these dynamic relationships between. I'm going to move on, though, to say that there are 3 ways that I believe we should know our audiences. We should have knowledge of their knowledge, we should have knowledge of their demographics, and we should have knowledge of their attitudes, and we should be absolutely clear that those 3 things do not identify people in any stereotyped kinds of ways. Who we are and what demographics we align with from the arbitrary nature of demographic classification should not be presumed to be the same. There are also different kinds of audiences worth knowing about. Again, I'm dancing very lightly over deep parts of the book here, but the goal is to think about what kind of requirements do differ between the general public that needs an appealing overview of insights, between executives that need sort of high-level overviews in order to determine what decisions they should make, and professionals who need detailed insights. Professionals are your allies in building your data stories. They are the people with whom you can rehearse your stories, and you can make them a lot better if you have rehearsal audiences to help you. Finally, I'll mention a quick guide to audience attitudes. There are at least 5 attitudes that the research revealed: positive, negative, mixed, which can be both positive and negative, indifferent, and polarized. And they require different strategies because it is possible to persuade the first 4 kinds of audiences. They take different tones and different tactics that I could not have put this together without the help of those 100 librarians who helped with all of this research, contributing in a year-long set of workshops, focus groups, and much more as colleagues and collaborators. But polarized audiences have some different challenges, and I'll talk about those when we get to resilience too. If people are spreading misinformation or deliberate disinformation, and that is the difference, misinformation is repeated, not necessarily deliberately, disinformation is spread with intent to confuse audiences. If people are doing that, then your goal should be to stay on message. Never repeat false information, not even in defense of yourself. If people say all librarians are horrible word here, never repeat we're not horrible word here. Your goal is to say your message. Stay on it. Consider the value of debate strategically. Some debates are instituted by groups that have trained local people to try to disrupt democratic governance processes. So if the intent is to confuse people enough that a vote won't happen, try to avoid that debate. There's a lot more to this, but that's a quick dance over it. The important piece here is that we think this is our job, and it is. We need to get our data into tellable form, but it's not just that easy, right? This is already hard. I want to acknowledge that. It is already hard. The real goal that we have is to get our data into tellable form so that somebody else can tell it for us when we're not in the room. We need to craft our messages so well that the stories will retell over time without us being there. You can test this out with your professional audiences. If you've got colleagues who are willing to play along with you, tell them your first draft and don't ask them for feedback right away. That's too much information. Ask them, tell me what you heard. So you practice your story and you say to your colleague, tell me back what I just said. This is the way that you know from testing it what message just moved along this communication circuit. And this is important because, my real interests come from 20 years of studying storytelling, where I am fascinated by the telling, the listening, the retelling of stories that last over hundreds and even thousands of years in the human tradition. It is quite possible that none of my stories will last that long. I don't know about you. I'm gonna hope that they do for you. But let's be real, this goes on with or without us. And so somebody somewhere is going to remember a story and be listening and retelling it. And if we're not in there to put our story in that mix, we don't even have a shot at the endurance of these hundreds of years. And this is our goal, because we are stewards of institutions that we inherited from before our time, and we will be passing on after our time too. So for reflection, I want you to think about which audiences could be retelling your stories that aren't hearing them often enough. So I don't know, James, if you were here from the beginning, but I gave several examples of potential library stories. The main ones were about physical renovation, one in relation to the space in a children's department and digging down deeper into our literal floor in that case, but it's also a metaphor for the talk. And another one is about thinking about physical access to the building and being able to tell a story either of we've got to change something here. We have measured how we are benchmarked lower than other people. We need to get our motivations and goals lined up to tell a story of what improvement would look like. Or once we've made the improvements, here's the achievement. Here's the map of how you are going to be able to get better into the library. Even if you use a walker or a wheelchair, you're going to have better access because of these kinds of changes that we've made. It's everyday stuff that we do all the time. I want to have a narrative strategies interlude because there are lots of ways to develop narratives, and I'm not going to go into all of them right now. You're going to have to read the book for some of it. But the motivations and goals, I think, really will help. You can think about the combination of emotion and information. That's kind of the classic strategies of continuity or transformation or discovery. Are you continuing to have a good accessible library? Or are you transforming the library to be more accessible? But really in transformation, the story of change is the story of people's lives, right? This is those not just output, but outcome measures, right? Like we are transforming so that people's lives can be better, so that students who have mobility challenges can get those scholarships and make use of the library that we know will make their long-time learning outcomes better. Or are you exploring the data? Is it kind of a discovery process, maybe with your library board or your administrative team, or within the team within your department? There are also plot strategies, applications, and there's a whole theory of SDAKW development that's based on the JSIST article about storytelling wisdom that I'm really not going to go into today. But I do want to mention that there are lots of different ways to structure narratives. Here's those three I mentioned: continuity, transformation, discovery. Continuity is like the normal practice of how libraries stay relevant. We say to each other, here's another library data story. We did a survey of our users and we found that most of them have laptops that they can use, but they don't have good printing services. So we're going to make sure that our printing services are top notch and really ready to plug and play, at least with the laptops that most of our students on our campus or with the laptops that most of our community members are bringing, right? We might not be able to always reach everything, but that could be a story of we're going to continue to provide great service by slightly adjusting how we do this. It's the data storytelling toolkit that I mentioned, and it's earlier in the chat if somebody else would want to go grab that and repost it. It's the DSTL, the URL starts with UIUC for University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So continuity, stability, and resilience despite challenges. This, by the way, is also the story we told around the pandemic, right? 2020 hit, some libraries had to close physical spaces, but we sustained services. How? A vast creative array of ways of doing this. But let's take the story of parking lots being repurposed to be pickup and drop off places, right? That's a story of stability and resilience despite challenges. We meet our goals despite all these different things that hit us in different ways. Thank you all. That's so kind. Transformation. We're talking about the awe at transformation, the joy of watching a hero triumph. Normally, I would say we don't tell these about ourselves. We tell them about other people, especially people who benefit from the work that we do. When we tell it about ourselves, it can ring a little false. People will say, oh, you're just advocating for your own job in the library. No, we want to advocate for impact, right? We want to advocate for the people whose lives are made better. So the transformation of watching a family of four. This is a real story I heard from a community college librarian where two parents were trying to earn 2 degrees beyond a high school education, which we know from the data will lead to 85% higher lifetime earnings. We often talk about lifelong learning, but in this case, this community college with these two parents and 2 kids set up a children's space so the children could study there on the weekends too. And in that way, they would be able to transform their lives in the long term. We do contribute to lifelong earning in some cases. I'm going to leave discovery for now because it's the most complicated one, but it's something that I will encourage you to read about in a book. Here's that example. This is Emory, the Emory libraries from 2023. They did exactly what many of us do all the time. They did a survey, they checked on their technology investments, and they adjusted them. And I would say the only thing so the brilliant part is this was a press release, right? They released this story. The only thing I would say that this story is missing, because we should be telling these stories all the time, we're doing this work all the time, we should be telling people about it, is one last opportunity for the community to weigh in and say, did I get it right? Did I get it right or did I get it wrong? Okay, so I'm a little behind time and I'm gonna stay where we are and take a little bit more time. Ramon said we could go to 150 and I'm gonna take the extra 7 minutes because I really wanna get to resilience. But I want you to start thinking about your audience in a storytelling relationship. This is also about understanding power. When do we tell people things? When do we listen to people about what they have to say? When are we hearing people's real stories? This can't be all the time every day. That is a recipe for burnout. But there does need to be a storytelling relationship where there's some way of people talking back when you make changes to your library. Let's talk about resilience. Many of you are here for this right now, and I know it. It's what we need. I know, and you know, that we've got to find strategic and practical grounds on which to base a stance against, for example, censorship, and that this requires intellectual and emotional strength. I want to be real. It's strength that we didn't have to cultivate a decade ago when we still topped out on every survey as most trusted institution in the United States, right? When trust is crumbling, the trust in trusted institutions goes with it. So we need a lot of resilience in these times. Over 20 years ago, I lived through a story of library building misinformation. At least one of you in this room was there with me, but I'm not going to name you. We were in a small town. There was a library board tasked with approving some plans for a very long-awaited building expansion. But there was a catch, because in a secret meeting, this mayor determined that the library director must change the building plans and reduce the square footage for the new renovation by almost 25%. The library director was told to tell no one, not even the board, who was going to be voting on these plans, by the way, or else he was going to be fired. So it's really hard with large amounts of data, like detailed blueprints for a library expansion. It can be quite overwhelming. And the mayor in this case was counting on no one noticing the last minute changes. This is a case of disinformation. Fortunately, the library director did speak with a few trusted staff members, and word got back to city council that things had been altered without a public process. Then the library board members were alerted by the city council members. City officials demanded to see the original plans and the original square footage. Stakeholders at all levels stood up, motivated public officials came together with a budget that could handle the expansion, and the originally planned renovation footprint was restored. That building still stands today, serving a busy community of library lovers. When we talk about issues like book banning, I'm sad to say library misinformation is not new. This happened over 20 years ago. It is more widespread, it is more organized, and it's maybe more toxic, but people using disinformation tactics or spreading misinformation is not new. Chapter 5 is devoted entirely to my insights from working on pandemic times with the World Health Organization as part of PAHO and translating that for librarians. And I draw on a couple of sources that I think are really important to know. One of them is On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. This is the print version. There's also a graphic novel version, which is the one that I bought because I enjoy illustrations as well. So I adapted a few. This is just a handful of the ones in the book, but I adapted a few of these lessons for librarians. We need to remember professional ethics in these times, like the Bill of Rights that I shared earlier, the Library Bill of Rights. The Library Bill of Rights may exist more as an ideal than as like a strategy plan or a practice manual for us. It's okay for organizations and groups over long periods of history to hold up some ideals that we are constantly in compromise with, trying to enact them in daily life. We still need to remember them and hold them in our minds. Defending institutions, this is our bedrock. When people have learned from our library stories what the library is, does, and has done, then they are positioned to retell our stories about its value and vote to support it. The importance of defensive institutions can't be overstated here, because it's the only way that future generations will have libraries. I know, and you know, that defense will look different in different contexts. I live in Illinois. My family is in Florida. I'm going to do a consulting gig with some Florida librarians in about a month. Defense will look different in different contexts. Be kind to each other. We are going to be fighting hard battles for a long time. We need all the resilience we can get. And finally, against dehumanization is the practice of small talk, small kindnesses. These are not just being nice. It is tempting to disengage when we're stressed, but making eye contact and small talk is a way of building common ground and assuring that our shared humanity stays front and center. Lastly, before I tell you one last story and we wrap up for questions, there are ways of addressing polarized audiences that have step-by-step systematic processes, and I go through them in detail in chapter 5. I won't go through them in detail right now, but identifying the problem is key. You need to be able to name it and put it into words, like blueprints have been altered without public process. That's a name for a problem. Determining what to do about the problem, and it is complicated in every situation. You have to think about who has power, who votes, what are the checks and balances, and even what are the relationships in a small community. When to persuade and when to avoid debate, well, that really depends. The library director himself did not stand up and have a debate. He sidestepped that because he would be replaced by somebody who just enacted the mayor's orders otherwise. So power matters, right? Sometimes we have to figure out a way to work not directly, but through connections and sideways. And finally, staying on message. This mayor was really rageful and would even one time threw a chair at a colleague of mine behind closed doors. Word of this uncivil behavior spread, and the good news is he was not elected again. In the book, I also cover book banning in this step-by-step way. Can't do everything in 45, 50 minutes, but which stories could amplify the resilience of your library is really important to think about, even just for yourselves as well as for your staff. I want to tell a story from the prologue in conclusion. As I was finishing this book, I received one of many notifications that our IMLS grant was terminated. The letter to staff at IMLS said that they were given a reduction in force notice and their jobs would be, quote, abolished, unquote. The lawsuits are ongoing and it's really complicated, but these struggles have brought to mind my grandfather, Frank B. Parsons, Papa Frank, who came home from World War II having seen a kind of injustice that changed his already generous spirit and opened his eyes. He was the city attorney for Fairfield, Alabama. In the 1960s, when the Ku Klux Klan spread flyers that they were planning a march in Fairfield, Alabama, just outside of Birmingham, it's a suburb of Birmingham, he defended the city and he won all the way up to the Alabama Supreme Court. Then the next year, he argued that case before the US Supreme Court and he lost in 1963 because we're going to win some and we're going to lose some. He never stopped working for justice. My mother and uncles describe his law offices even now as the most integrated places they ever saw in Birmingham, Alabama, and the whole region. In a context where racism was rampant and normal, he practiced law to help others no matter their race or income. I remember people stopping by the house with vegetables in the summer. My uncle remembers a guy who brought some socks as payment. That's what people had. He was a quiet man. He also served on the school board and advocated for desegregation, while my grandmother, Elizabeth Reams Parsons, Mama Lib, served on the library board and advocated for literacy for all. I can tell you at his funeral, the First United Methodist Church in Fairfield, Alabama was overflowing with the most integrated crowd I ever saw in all our visits to Alabama. That's a picture of Papa Frank. That's Papa Frank and Mama Lib when they were just married. That's me down in the red t-shirt and the shorts with Papa Frank and my little brother, Daniel McDowell, and my cousin Beth, who was brand new then. Listen, we win some and we lose some, but we keep going. That's what he did. It's what I do. It's what I want us all to be doing. The invitation here is for us all to become storytellers, honoring and amplifying the traditions of librarianship that have been the most inclusive, the most hopeful, the most radiantly successful. Our long-term success depends on including everyone. There are two other books I want you to know about from ALA Editions. I could not miss mentioning, edited by Dr. Nicole Cook, The Legacy of Black Women in Librarianship. And if you want another take on broader library ecosystems, look at Strengthening Library Ecosystems by Hand and all there. It's a wonderful collection. If you want some other ways of thinking about visual data and meaning in numbers, your comments are really touching my heart. Here's a hand-drawn set of data stories between friends. These are postcards between two friends who recorded the ways that they laughed and cried and shared information over time. And here's a book about making meaning out of numbers. And this is the book again that we're here to talk about. Thank you so much for hearing me. Thank you for being with me here today. Thanks for sharing in that story. We're going to keep going. That's what we do. These are just a few of the ways to reach me. Thank you so much. Your comments are just amazing. I want to make sure you have a way to connect with me. Oh, LinkedIn, I'm going to have to grab that a different, oh no, I can do it. I have to grab it this way. I just want to make sure you have a way to stay connected with me. I've been posting an awful lot on LinkedIn lately because of the new book, but really it is something that I want the events that I'm helping to spread the word and to reach as many people as can be reached. I will stay late for questions. Thank you all so much. And yeah, it's great to be here with you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was wonderful. I don't think we were expecting to cry, to be moved, and to be educated so robustly, but thank you. And it's totally unsurprising coming from you, having known you for a few months now.
Thanks,
Uh,
Ramon.
we do have several questions in the chat, and I've got a few other questions asked by people who unfortunately weren't able to show up live today, but did want to engage with you and our audience. I will start with one from a Peggy Nizomo. It is, what methods do you use to gauge the public's attitudes, and how do you adjust your story when these attitudes are mixed and are constantly shifting?
This is such a great question, Peggy. Thank you for that. What I want to say about that is that the data needs to stay the same. So one thing you can do is come up with a handful of really solid talking points, and you're going to say those the same every time, right? Always say the same data points and try to keep it down like 3 to 5. That's as much as people can remember anyhow. So like 3 to 5, that's it. So let's say you've got 3 good talking points. Use them every time, use the same numbers, use the same data. And if you're in a shifting context, it is okay. It is even advisable to say, look, I tell this story a little differently over here than I do here, but I'm telling it to you this way because I want you to remember this data, right? And then land on your data again. So I would say transparency and being honest about being strategic as a storyteller actually will work in your favor, because what you don't want to do is be completely telling stories in different ways at different times without acknowledging that you're trying to connect with real people as you do this. So I love that question. I think it's a great one. I think the answer to that one really is just thinking about what part of your process can you make transparent? It's not always every part of the process that you can make transparent. There are decisions. Um, Libraries have hard things to work through. There are trauma things that happen to library workers. There are traumas that are experienced. Not everything can just be blown out into the public. And also, we have to really moderate some of our emotional reactions to things. But if you have your talking points and you acknowledge that you're telling the story in different ways to connect everybody together, let people know that, and that will work. That will work as well as anything to navigate those contexts. Yeah.
Awesome. Next question from Michaela Herrick. Thanks for a great presentation. I'm curious about the ACRL assessment and action work. The project focused a lot on only using in-group comparisons of students using libraries in academic settings. I completely agree with helping strengthen the work and message of the library, but I'm
Hmm.
worried that while these studies are a start, they are not actually conveying the possible effects of a library, and citing such studies as justification of our impact is not actually factual. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's really interesting because there's robust evidence that school libraries have some of the exact same measurable outcomes. There's even a recent economics study by Gilpin, which, it is possible you could tear any of these apart in different ways. But I think it's worth thinking about the evidence that we have and the arguments we can plausibly make. Because I'm not here to lie about these things, but I'm also here to say that there are times when we've got to focus on things like, here's a URL that'll get you there to that talk. But we got to focus on things like the return on investment of public dollars. So here's Gilpin stating that. You've got to look at Keith Lance Curry's work if you haven't already, because I don't think academic libraries are really that different than school libraries, to be honest. I think it's an artificial division based on age and to some degree based on ageism. So I would really encourage you to look at Keith Curry Lance's work and to notice that. Let's see, Keith Curry Lance. I'm trying to find one of his. It's the slide study that I pulled a piece from. Yeah, so it's the school library. These again, these are really messy URLs, but at least you can get to something. So I would argue that tearing one study down is not nearly as effective for what libraries need as looking at the full context of studies. And it is okay to be speculative about our impact, especially if there are multiple sources of evidence from different kinds of education-related libraries, directly curricular-related libraries, I would say, that students have better outcomes with them than without them. Thanks for that question.
Very nice. A question from Catherine Witzig. Can you speak to practical methods to encourage cultural sensitivity, especially with regard to cultural evaluation of different types of data, for example, indigenous oral storytelling traditions as data? And is
Yeah.
this covered in your book?
It's so I did not cover indigenous oral storytelling traditions as data in the book, but I did cover a particular focus on whether or not people's stories should be considered as data. And I have some different thoughts about that. I'm not without enthusiastic consent, that's for sure. Not within power dynamics whereby one entire population group has subjugated another population group. That is not a good case in which to uh, lift up, lift out and away from their control the stories as data of a subjugated group in any way. So it's a great question. What I would say about that, I'm just going to pull up the whole book for myself in keyword search on this. What I would say about that is that I think it's thinking about the ethics of whether or not a person's story should or can really be considered as data. And are, let me see if I can find it. Um, it's hard to keyword search when I don't have the exact phrase in my head. I wrote it and I don't have it all memorized because it took 2 years to write, as it does. But the idea would be to think in terms of, are you exposing people to some kind of vulnerability or causing harm by sharing their story for them, especially without permission? Stories about poverty. Poverty carries stigma. I didn't make up the world. I wish it didn't. I wish that were not something that carried stigma, but it does. And that means that disclosing someone's status in relation to poverty can be harmful. I found it. It's box 2.2, are people's stories data? A person's story belongs to the person, right? So my story of growing up in a wonderful middle-class household with free lunch tickets before the age of about 8 because we just didn't have enough money, that's mine to tell, right? That belongs to me as a person. That is told in a specific context of communication, namely you're trying to think about what stories you could use or couldn't use and what might or might not cause harm, right? It's fine for me to tell it now. I'm 53. Who cares about my school lunches? If I was 7, please don't tell that story for me or about me, right? Like seriously, that would have caused a lot of harm and a lot of stigma activation around me as a person. So yeah, you get this, right? Like thank you for that. So it's specific to the lived experience of an individual person. And I would say culture stories are the most complicated category. I didn't fully cover this in this book. There's an article that I hope at some point Dr. Nicole Cook and I are going to get back to writing where we talk about people's stories, culture stories, and institution stories, and how institutions have cultures, but they don't go as deep as people's lived cultures. So we have to respect cultures of institutions and understand that people have different positionalities within an institution, different power arrangements, but also it still touches on some of the things that create human cultures that go very deep into who we are, right? Into who we believe ourselves to be. Um, Libraries' data is different than a person's story. It belongs to the organization. It's collected in order to travel across multiple contexts. You're always collecting it for at least some report, right? But if nothing else, you're collecting it to help, fulfill your duty or maybe to make a decision. It's gathered to identify patterns and trends that lead to insights. So it's very different in a lot of ways than people's stories. And it's different also, I think, than culture's stories, where the kind of enthusiastic consent to tell the story of a culture is best given by somebody inside it. But just notice that being inside a culture is not a monolithic thing, because some of us are inside of cultures, but on one edge. Like we don't always, the people in the middle think like, my mom kind of, I sound like a Yankee, right? To my Southern mama, right? Like that's the reality. Um, I'm still Southern in many ways. I'm also from Illinois and a Midwesterner, right? I'm both and, but I don't sound very Southern unless I get mad. My husband tells me I sound real Southern when I get mad. So So, it's thinking about these culture things are not monolithic. Taking a story is not a simple act. I think library data, there's a lot of room. What I would encourage you to think about is there's a lot of room to dig deeper in our own library data first before we start going out to other people's stories. There's an awful lot we've collected and haven't talked about. Thank you for that. Great question. I could talk about that question for a day, and I won't. So thank you.
We got a few more. The next one is from Sabrina Girk. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anybody's name. Again, thank you for the inspiring presentation. As your colleague in a different country, Germany, how can I support you right now other than following the advice you've given so far? Me and my coworkers are all horrified to see what is happening to you in librarianship, and we love to help in any way possible. And maybe there's a connection there to data storytelling and what you talked about with mental health and kindness and supporting each other, and
Yeah.
with your reference to the handbook on library ecosystems, perhaps thought of Broadway, not just within a state, but across borders.
Yeah, Sabrina, what a question to get at this moment. Thank you so much. There are a couple things I like to follow. Every library is one of them. Every library has a great executive director who's in my LinkedIn contacts, John Chokstra. And I would recommend following them and following John to see what's the latest. Sometimes they can speak even more openly than American Library Association, although I would also recommend following the American Library Association because the American Library Association has a number of ongoing lawsuits with the federal government, some of our grants are involved in here in the United States. So it's really a complex thing, but I do recommend ALA very strongly. I recommend ALA membership. This gives me a chance to say that, Ramon. We talked about that early on in our conversations. It is very important to be a member of your library agency. Patrick Sweeney, yes, exactly. Yes, and I follow Patrick as well. So just a couple of, I find LinkedIn to be a really good resource for library connections myself. Um, I don't think it hurts to talk about it, Sabrina. I think it might be good for people in other countries to know. I was in Denmark for 2 weeks this fall. I've had a sabbatical 2 years ago in Denmark and Norway. I was hoping I was going to the land of library funding nirvana or something. I don't know. That's probably not the right word to use, but the library, I was hoping I was going to a land of plentiful funding. I found in Norway and Denmark some of the same battles that I'm talking about here. I'm sure some things have been happening in German contexts that are not moving in the direction of intellectual freedom. I've been in Austria recently as well. I know that they had 180 days of governmental instability, and that's just the few regions of the world I've been in lately. So we are at a global level, I think, in times of real uncertainty. And knowing that you would say that right now, I know it means a lot to me, and I bet it means a lot to other folks who are here in the United States, just to see that you would take the time, to be joining us from a totally different context. It matters. So yeah, yeah, it's great. Um, can I jump to one question I wanna answer about
Sure.
stigmatization and neurodivergence? I
Absolutely.
want to tell you, I have permission to tell you a story about my brother who is neurodivergent in multiple ways. He is such an interesting person. He would say I have a very unusual brain, and he is right. I don't talk about neurodivergence specifically in the book, but I do think the ways that I write and the ways that I teach are entirely informed by growing up with my brother. We learned to read at extremely different points in our young lives. We had very different takes on how the world worked. Um, he nonetheless can find objects in space a lot better than I can. Let me tell you that right now. Like, give me an idea any day, an object in space, good luck. Um, I think that there's a lot that could be said about neurodivergence. My experience is personal rather than professional. I'm not an expert in that area, which is part of why I didn't go there. But I need you to know that when I won this teaching award in 2022, I called my brother and said, I couldn't have done this without your brain. I only know how to teach people I don't walk into a classroom assuming that everyone has the same brain. And I didn't walk into this book assuming that everyone had the same brain. And that's why there are three whole different ways in chapter 3 of building stories. because you might be really focused on driving up from the data. You might be really focused on the feeling you want to get across and kind of building it intuitively, or you might be someplace in the middle trying to think about what are good plot strategies. All three of those things are laid out. In my mind, that is because of the different ways that our brains work. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that and to my wonderful brother who has been so gracious to encourage me to tell some of his stories. I'm really grateful for that.
Um, we've got two more questions. The last one in the Q&A function is actually from another one of our authors, Megan Hendel, who is a co-author of Prepare Libraries and Powered Teams. And her question is, I know Keith Curry Lance's work well, and my experience has been that school and district leaders don't buy that libraries are the key lever in those studies. How do we use that data but also bridge that gap for leaders?
Yeah, this is really hard. And let me tell you, academic librarians, one of the places where the difference between school and academic librarians comes up the most um, is in questions like this of who's going to be your advocate, right? School libraries, you've got to do it all from scratch. And that means your colleagues at the teacher level, your peers in that organization are extremely important to help you get up to those levels of power that will make the decision. I'm going to be real with you. I've been thinking about this case a lot myself because I grew up with, even though I can't get his last names in the right order, I grew up with Keith's work. And I came of age in the 90s reading Keith Curry Lance's reports, seeing the importance of school libraries. I can credit my professor, Dr. Christine Jenkins, who some of you may know from Illinois, who's since retired. She was the one who taught us about his work and the evidence there. I've seen incredible infographics about this work. I have seen, communication strategies that I would say are sophisticated, persistent, diligent, well thought out, backed by absolutely compelling stories. I don't know why this message isn't getting across. I know that it isn't, and I agree with you that fundamentally we have been losing ground as a nation over time in school librarianship. Um, Not just in book challenges or things like that, which have always, that school librarianship has always been the center hotbed for book challenges. Probably most of you know that. But in this case, it's thinking about things like why is it that educators could have all of this evidence and it could be really good evidence with the best research we've got, and yet that slide project that was the most recent one is about the decline of school librarianship at a national level. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. If I did know the answer to that, I might be writing a totally different book. What I do know is I've got this, 20 some years of teaching storytelling. And what I notice is that we've got more data and then we have stories about our data. And that is one of those stories that's been told really well. And I really wish that those stories were powerful enough to gain the kind of power that I believe school librarianship deserves. We know its impact. We know that there's solid evidence. Like I said before, I mean, if you don't like one kind of evidence, it's worth looking at other kinds of evidence. But the great thing about the Gilpin article I shared is if you want to have an impact in your community, there's a dollar amount attached. It's $200 per capita to make a measurable difference, right? So you can calc that out for your city council, right? You can actually do some math and figure out what that should be to make a substantial, significant difference and improvement. But it's a great point. I guess what I would say is it's a great point. It's a cause that I care about. I don't know how to fix everything about what's happening with school librarians, but I would still keep watching Keith Curry Lance's work. He's been at it all this time. He's really the hero in that data part of the school libraries field. Um, and yeah, I think finding stories that will help people understand the real human elements of your data. I tried to pack the book with those so that it wasn't just structures and meanings and approaches, but also that everything's kind of anchored to a story so that you can feel your way through it. Um, Resilience is key, right? I mean, I see the grief in the chat. I see the grieving. I acknowledge the grieving. I am in the grieving that we are having right now over some of the losses. I am still filling out paperwork for that IMLS grant. It is still not resolved. Maybe it will be when there's a federal budget by October 1st, maybe it won't be. I don't know. I mean, it's really that level of limbo. I can't get much done. What I know is that we're going to win some and we're going to lose some. And everybody always has. So, welcome to it. If it's your first time losing any big ones, listen, you're not alone. We're here, and sticking together and supporting each other. That's another thing I want this book to convey is how truly precious to me the best parts of the librarian tradition are, and how many, thanks, Leah, and how many more opportunities I think we might have, to connect with one another and to not just bolster the profiles of our libraries, but also really strengthen each other as people who could listen to each other's rehearsal stories, right? And tell back what we heard. So all those kinds of things. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks, Ramon, for leading us in such a great session. It's terrific to have you right here with me.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful note to end on, just encouraging but keeping it real. Uh, so this event, as many of you asked in the chat, will be available to be watched again and shared via the main American Library Association YouTube page, probably in the coming hours. We will be announcing other free events produced by the team at ALA Editions via eBlast. So be sure that you are signed up to receive those and that you're checking our website, which is alaeditions.org/events to learn about future events. Our next event on October 6th will actually be about media literacy and visual literacy. So I will be announcing that soon. And everybody who is signed up for this event will get an email with the details about how to sign up for that one as well in just a few weeks. Again, I want to thank the audience for coming today and being so engaged with the presentation, and Kate, just for everything that you bring
Thank you.
to this, everything that you brought to this presentation, to your book, to your teaching, and to just librarianship as a profession, period. Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure and my joy. It's what I'm here for. Yeah. Thanks so much.
All right, I will talk to you all again next month. Again, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of the day.